You're listening to True White Collar Crime. This is a weekly podcast about legendary white collar crimes and the people behind them. My name's Sean McKenna. You can find this show on YouTube at Sean McKenna, my channel. If you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe. Give this video a like. If you are a podcast listener and you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please give this video a 5-star review. It really helps out the show. All right, let's get going. Enron. It's a buzzword. It's a big name. There's a lot of information thrown around about Enron, but what actually happens? Let's start with some intro facts. Enron used to be the 7th biggest company in the United States. The company was worth $60 billion and then was bankrupt in the matter of a month. So how did this happen? Let's dig in. There was a guy named Ken Lay. On April 15th, 1942, Kenneth Lay was born in Tyrone, Missouri. He grew up poor in a small town. His family owned a local feed store, and they did not have access to indoor plumbing when he was a kid. He started from the bottom. I read a story that one day a truck driver actually ran into their feed store and killed some of their chickens, so that was kind of it for the business there. And then Ken's father took a job selling stoves door to door. So he thought it couldn't get much worse. It did. Ken attended the University of Missouri and got a degree in economics. In 1965, he finished college and went to work for a company called Humble Oil. And this company would eventually evolve to become Exxon. While working for the company, Ken also studied to earn his PhD. He joined the Navy in 1968 and went to work at the Pentagon. He also taught economics at George Washington University at that time. I assume that was at night. In 1971, Ken Lay got married and eventually had 2 kids. October 1972, President Nixon made Ken the Deputy Undersecretary of Energy in the Interior Department. So this is a smart guy moving up. 1973, the next year, the country suffered an energy shortage and an oil embargo. Ken pushed strongly for the deregulation of the energy industry during his time in public office. When he saw that this deregulation was likely to pass, Ken then looked to make a move back to the private sector. In 1976, Ken became president of the pipeline division at Florida Gas. In 1979, he became president of the entire company. He owned several properties, and he actually had an affair with his secretary in 1980. So cliché. In 1984, Ken became CEO of Houston Natural Gas. He also began to buy pipelines in California and Florida. 1985, shout out all the dates for you guys here. Ken's company merged with Internorth and became a very large gas distribution company. After the merger, the leadership team decided the new company would be called Enron. In 1986, the company was not doing well. They lost almost $15 million in that year. Ken Lay cut jobs, he limited executive pay, and he started selling off some of the pipelines he acquired previously. Eventually, the company's bonds were given junk status, which is an absolute no-go for an investor. Unless you're getting a huge high yield, then it's still risky. However, Enron Oil, one of the more important sectors of the company, showed some promise. Part of Enron's oil dealings included oil trading speculation. During the speculation, a buyer would enter into a long-term agreement to buy oil from a seller. Traders can bet on the price of oil over time. Fortunately for Ken, this sector of the company was very profitable. In 1985, the oil trading division raked in $10 million. In 1986, they increased profits to $28 million. On fire. In 1989, Congress passed the Natural Gas Control Act. This act stated that first sales of natural gas could not be subjected to price regulation. Sounds dangerous to me. This piece of legislation required a large amount of restructuring of the gas pipeline industry. Enron then formed Enron Finance, and Ken hired Jeff Skilling to be a new corporate officer. Skilling was a Harvard Business School grad with a consulting background. Eventually, Jeff developed an idea to form a gas bank. Instead of paying gas producers over 20 years, they would pay cash up front and then receive the long-term supply of gas. Gas producers were happy to do these deals. Natural gas became more and more popular with utility companies, and the United States became more dependent on natural gas over time. Jeff then decided that these natural gas contracts could be actively traded. He wanted Enron to own contracts instead of natural gas and physical pipelines. Natural gas trading is complicated because of transportation contracts, pricing involved, reserving space on pipelines, long-term and short-term supply, and also the seasonality of demand. You have to balance that as well. Enron Oil operated under its own rules because it was such an important and profitable piece of the business. The oil division then sought to make even more money by changing their accounting method. Let's take a look at the books. Jeff Skilling proposed a mark-to-market accounting approach. Normally, revenues from a contract are recorded as deals come in. Mark-to-market accounting, however, would involve estimating the fair value of the contract and adjusting it as prices changed. Mark-to-market makes sense in some instances, like when a firm is trading stocks, the actual value of the security changes. It goes up and down. However, when used in this context, Enron had room to mark the contracts as more profitable than they actually were. This materially affected Enron's reported value over time. And I can tell you right now, it didn't look like they were marking things down to reflect fair value when the value of their deals went down. It was very much an upward trajectory for this mark-to-market practice. After Enron got approval from the SEC to use this accounting method, Skilling decided to not only use the new method for the current year, 1992, but also the previous year, 1991 as well. In January 1992, Enron announced it would provide gas for a power plant in New York. This deal was estimated to be a $4 billion deal over 20 years. The company began booking profits even before the New York plant was even up and running. England then deregulated their energy industry, and Enron also booked a 20-year deal to build a power plant there. Of course, they decided to record the profits immediately as well. 1992, the oil division of the company had income on paper of $122 million. Enron did not follow up with the most important part of mark-to-market accounting, which was to adjust the value of assets to represent the current market price. They would stay with their first estimate and leave it at that. Of course, there wasn't that much incentive for the managers at Enron to make realistic estimates. They would make the estimates that made them the most money. Skilling implemented a peer review process every 6 months. Colleagues would put each employee's photo up on a projector and rate their performances over time. Sounds like a pretty healthy work culture. Nothing wrong going on there. Normally, the highest earning individuals were ranked the highest. Sessions often got heated and took a huge amount of time. Sounds like a waste. Enron was also able to pay very well because of their fake earnings that they were raking in. Banks would loan Enron money based on the size of the projects they were doing. They would even get loans for projects that hadn't even started yet. In 1993, the company brought in $387 million. 1994, they did $453 million. 1995, they did $520 million. And those are all profit numbers, to my knowledge. I'll put in a retraction if they're not. Enron's stock price went to the moon, 3x, over this time, and executives took home huge paychecks. Ken Lay deregulated an industry and then directly profited from the shift to privatization. If you remember, he previously had that government gig, pushed for deregulation, went private himself, went to a private company, profited from it directly. In 1996, Skilling took over as the president and COO. The company was doing $13 billion in revenue and had almost 12,000 employees at this point. The stock price, though, then stagnated because Enron's financials were so complex. Enron created a risk assessment and control department in response, saying that they would regulate themselves. This group was supposed to assess the risk associated with large deals. They classified these large deals as being $500,000 or greater in terms of deal size. Expenses also were not really considered at Enron. Anyone who hit their earnings target would be in good standing, regardless of how much they racked up in business expenses. Doesn't make sense, but that's how it was. Employees were encouraged to buy Enron shares as well. The average employee had 50% of their 401k invested in Enron shares. Who was their financial advisor? Sounds like it was the president of Enron. Skilling would ask analysts what numbers they need to see to justify the current stock valuation. Then he would fabricate earnings to reflect what they wanted to see. Oh, actually, yeah, that's what we made. Crazy. I guess the stock price can stay the same. Mark-to-market accounting remained a central piece of the scheme. Enron started using this accounting method not only in the natural gas futures division, but by 1997 they were using mark-to-market in every division. Dealmakers began to go back to contracts up to 5 years in the past and try to restructure them to reflect even greater profitability. Small changes in these contracts could show millions in profit on paper for the firm. Enron was also dodging taxes like their lives depended on it. In 1995, the company was able to keep $650 million in profits through tax transaction maneuvering. Skilling had the tax division working to save money, and they acted almost as another profit creator. Enron's auditor, you may be like, hey, where were they during all this? You'd think they would be keeping an eye on some of these misdeeds going on. Enron's auditor was Arthur Anderson. In March of 1998, Andy Fostow was named CFO. Andy created shell companies when Enron needed to inflate earnings and hide extra debt. Wall Street fell in love with this idea. Enron created hundreds of these shell companies over time for their maneuvering. In December of 2000, Senator Phil Gramm attached an amendment to the Commodities Futures Modernization Act. President Clinton signed this right before he left office. This act made huge steps toward increasing the deregulation of energy. Enron's lobbyists played a big part in drafting the amendment. Enron wanted to create an electricity trading business similar to its natural gas trading division. Skilling let Wall Street analysts come in and look around the electricity trading division at Enron. The company decorated a room and had employees from other departments come in and act like they were hard at work that day. It was literally a scene from like a movie set or something like that. They were all acting, paid actors for that day. Skilling bought Portland General Electric. Enron then began to lobby California hard for deregulation. The politicians passed measures that partially deregulated the market in California. This then allowed Enron to take advantage of the state of California in a major way. Enron began to overload power lines. When they clogged up the lines, the prices surged. The first incident of forced overloading cost California $7 million. These crafty schemes had clever names like Ricochet, things like that. Enron shipped electricity back and forth between states and bypassed price regulations by doing this. Traders bought power for around $250 in California. They could sell it to Arizona for 5 times that price and then resell it back to California for another 5x markup. Enron traders would overschedule the transmission line and charge huge surge prices to companies that needed to use the line so they could rake in even more profits. These situations often came up during a time of high demand when people desperately needed power. Enron would then get paid huge fees to fix the power line. So they're doubling down. They're causing the problem and getting paid to fix it. Enron also shut down facilities to cause electricity prices to surge. They would schedule maintenance or other work to drive up prices at a time when their facilities were needed. In 2001, Enron and Ken Lay both contributed to Bush's committee. Enron gave $6 million in total political donations spread across 250 politicians. California went to the federal government for help. They're like, hey, we messed up. The Bush administration dismissed California's concerns as a symptom of their partial deregulation. They said they should deregulate completely and lighten up on their strict environmental rules. The Bush administration did nothing until June of 2001 when they finally mandated interstate power price caps. Power prices began to fall because the predatory loopholes were closed. The Federal Energy Regulation Commission then began to investigate and force energy companies to turn over their internal communications. It was later determined that this scandal cost the state of California $40 billion. Let that sink in for a second. Enron's financial prospects then took a downturn. The company's debt was now $3.9 billion. In February 2001, Fortune magazine wrote an article about Enron being overpriced. The writer asked about how Enron made so much profit. Skilling had a call with her and hung up on her at the end and said she just didn't get it. Enron's PR department got her back on the phone and tried to say that they were a logistics firm and not a trading business. You know, all these nuanced words that nobody understands. April 17th, 2001, Skilling got on a call with Wall Street analysts. When they asked why Enron would not release its balance sheet, Skilling called the analyst an a-hole. Wall Street was not very happy after this. The stock price began to drop. August 13th, Skilling said he was going to leave Enron and he sold $33 million worth of stock options. Ken Lay also sold $78 million worth of options. Wall Street analysts continued to be suspicious, but senior leadership assured the public that the company was in a very strong financial position. In September of 2001, Enron stock started to dip. In October, Arthur Andersen, Enron's auditor, knew that Enron would be investigated. The Enron and Arthur Andersen teams then began to shred massive amounts of incriminating documents. They shredded more than 2,000 pounds of paper. That's insane. They also deleted thousands of emails and computer files. The frenzy finally stopped when the SEC subpoenaed Enron. In early December, Enron filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy. They also laid off 4,000 employees. Many employees lost a huge portion of their savings since they had so much of their investments in Enron stock. The Justice Department opened a criminal investigation. Skilling spoke at a hearing before the Senate committee. Skilling claimed the collapse of the company was due to a run-on-the-bank situation where the company's partners fled and left them destitute. Blah, blah, blah. Arthur Andersen was charged with obstruction of justice. 28,000 people were out of work there. 20,000 were left unemployed at Enron. Andy Fossil pled guilty to fraud and got 10 years with no parole. Skilling got 24 years in prison. Ken Lay was convicted but died of a heart attack before sentencing. Skilling cut a deal with the DOJ in 2013. He paid $40 million in restitution and was released from prison in 2019. Skilling is now fundraising for the launch of an online oil and gas trading company. Go figure. One trick pony. Craziness. Thank you all for listening. I do have some sources. Sorry, that was an abrupt ending. But sources were the Dollop podcast, an amazing podcast. Please go listen to it. Episode 239. I'll put a link. Cold Fusion is a YouTube channel. They had a YouTube video on this. It's awesome. There's like this Australian guy that does that. Wikipedia had an article on Enron. Company Man had a YouTube video. There's a movie called Enron, Smartest Guys in the Room. And what else? That's it. Thank you all for listening. Please like, subscribe on YouTube. My YouTube, Sean McKenna. Social media, I'm Sean McKenna with an X after it, Sean McKenna X. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a 5-star review. Write something short. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. This has been True White Collar Crime. We will see you next week. Peace.